Hello, we're Quaint Curious Volumes. Cliff, that's the name of my channel. My name's James, and I have a guest for the first time. And guest is Clifford R. Murphy. And he's here because we're going to talk a little bit about his book, which I'll try and get lit well, which is Ink, the Indelible J. Mayo Williams.
Yeah, here I have better lighting, I think, though I have a blur.
You have a
It doesn't
blur.
help.
Get the copy
Anyhow,
that's not blurred. It's a lot easier to read. And Cliff,
thanks. Thanks for
yeah.
having me on your show, James.
Thank you. So Clifford R. Murphy is a musician and ethnomusicologist. He's a founding member of the rock band Say Zuzu, the director of the Smithsonian Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage, sounds important, and the author of Yankee Twang, Country and Western Music in New England. Country music in New England, what? And
I know.
and Inc., the indelible J. Mayo Williams. Now, a lot of people are not going to know who J. Mayo Williams is.
Mhm.
And I only know about him because of you. Well, and I must have read about him because you talk about other like blues scholars who mentioned him in passing. He's in
Mhm.
Samuel Charters's book, The Country Blues, but he's kind of an obscure figure for a lot of people. But reading this book, he was I mean he was involved in all kinds of stuff, and if you're a fan of early blues, he came in contact with just a who's who of people. So tell us how you got interested in J. Mayo Williams and what led you to write this book.
Sure. Well, I had been a working musician, and the wheels kind of came off that when I was about 30, and I went to grad school at Brown University to study ethnomusicology. And that was in 2003 in the fall, as you know, James.
Yes.
And full disclosure, James and I went to school together and
Mhm.
started together at the same time. And so in that first semester, I did an independent study with Jeff Todd Titan, who you and I both studied under, ethnomusicologist, blues scholar, and he and I had talked about my doing an independent study on the hillbilly and race record industry.
Mhm.
And in true and wonderful Brown University fashion, it was kind of a choose your own adventure.
Yes.
And so Jeff had given me a stack of 78 quarterly magazines
Mhm.
from the 1970s. And in one of those articles, it was focused on Paramount Records.
Mhm.
And I think that it was a two-part um, magazine piece called The Rise and Fall of Paramount Records or something like that. And uh, Ink Williams featured significantly in that story. Um, and there was a reference to him, I believe, in a footnote
Mhm.
that said that he had gone to Brown
Mhm.
and that he was also a football star.
Right.
And the idea to me that uh, there was a black football star at Brown in the 19 teens,
Mhm.
it just, I was kind of incredulous, and I also couldn't believe I'd never heard of this guy before. And the idea that he went to school where I was going to school,
Yes.
I thought this can't be right. So I went to Jeff and I said, "Hey, it says this here," and he
Yes.
found that intriguing.
Mhm.
And he said, "Well, why don't you go over to the alumni office?" And so I
Mhm.
did, and they pulled his file,
Mhm.
and they said, "Yes, indeed, he did go to school here, and here's a
Yeah.
bunch of stuff about him."
Yeah.
Um, and that uh, is what the entrance to the rabbit hole looks like.
Right. They give you his transcripts and everything.
Yes. Saw his grades. I saw his cranky correspondence with the
Mhm.
alumni office from the
Mhm.
early 1970s, where they hadn't gotten his correct address and
Mhm.
all those sorts of things.
Yeah.
And the more that I learned about him, the more I couldn't believe that we didn't all know who this guy was in the
Yeah.
same way that, I don't know, people who are nerdy about the history of country music, everybody knows who Ralph Peer is.
Yeah. Hmm.
And this idea of a big bang of country music, and
Hmm.
the guy who first recorded the Carter family and Jimmy Rogers.
Right.
And in the story of blues and gospel and
Hmm.
R&B, um, Mayo Williams was that guy over and over and over and over
Hmm.
again
Yeah.
from about 1923 till about 1950.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And it really is. Let's talk a bit about the football part because I know you're a big jock and a big,
I mean, anyone can see that. You didn't have.
but uh, the it was now right. So Cliff and I, for our viewers, we come at this from as music guys, and but Ink Williams was involved in Brown University college football. At the time that college football, and particularly like Ivy League football, was football. Like that was the
Mhm.
big show if you were interested in this
Yeah,
relatively new sport. And so when he was playing college football against Yale and such, and it was on an integrated team. And there were very few other black people at Brown at the time, but one of them, who was his classmate, was a guy named Fritz Pollard. And I think Fritz Pollard to this day, among scholars of early football, is like one of the big names, you know.
yes, yeah.
Um, and they were playing also.
He's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and he was the first black head coach of an NFL team.
Mhm,
And in sort of the, I don't know what you want to call it, third wave, fourth wave civil rights movement in
mhm,
football, there's this organization called the Fritz Pollard Alliance, which
right,
really is the organization that advocates for greater diversity in head coaching ranks in pro football.
right.
And it's named obviously after Fritz, who went to Brown with Williams and
Mhm,
who was buddies with him,
mhm,
recruited him to come to the school.
mhm,
And interestingly, also kind of was this known figure with people like Jelly Roll Morton and other jazz and blues and R&B musicians in that time period.
mhm,
Played music in college with Paul Robeson.
mhm,
Um, and I don't know. I mean, once you kind of piece those things together, at least for a person like me who
mhm,
loves music and sports history,
mhm.
it kind of, I don't know, it periodically in grad school was a bit of a problem for me in that I sort of became so fixated on it that my professors had to say, hey, you have to do this other stuff too, you know?
Right. Yes. Um, so so after okay, well, another thing I found interesting is in this early period of football, you had the option of playing with no helmet. And Mayo Williams, he played with no helmet. Not that
Yeah.
the helmets were that great back then, but there is a story about a guy getting his three of his molars knocked out in the middle of a game. So it's pretty rough, pretty rough.
Yeah.
And they played the whole game, right? So there were 11 guys and they played both offense and defense the whole time.
Yeah.
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 So
For like the first, I don't know, 30 years of the NFL, uh, you had your essentially your starting lineup played offense and defense. They
mhm,
just switched direction,
yeah,
and they played most of them played the whole time.
yeah,
And Ink Williams, almost every game that he played in college and in professional football, he played the entire game
right.
without substitution, which is amazing. And it
Mhm,
was rough,
yeah.
and people were. People brutalized one another,
Mhm,
and that story about the guy losing his molars. I mean, that was from a newspaper account
yeah.
where they had to call time in order to find the guy's teeth on the field, which
Yeah.
is, I mean, that is a great
Yes.
little piece of um, color.
Right. Right. as is the story where he's talking about, and I forget the guy's name, but there was another player on another team, and they shared a locker room. And for some reason, Ink Williams was interviewed and talked about how good he looked in the shower.
Hmm.
And he said about what a fine specimen of a man he was, or something to that effect. And then it got reprinted in another newspaper where they kind of put his words into minstrel dialect, which was very
Yes.
strange stuff. Um, so yeah, I mean, this is not a racial utopia. And when he was playing it, against other teams, he would be, showered with all kinds of racial epithets from the opposing team's fans and even from his own team's fans.
Yeah.
And there is a certain amount of racism just in him having the nickname Ink, right? Even though
Of course.
he embraced that himself. But after after college, there is also kind of the beginning of sort of a network of people who are trying to, lift up these, maybe what they called the talented 10th, or,
Sure.
talented and educated black men. And so he had offers to go and either teach or be the head coach at Morehouse College, and he had, or at other HBCUs. Just with him having a college degree, they were offering him positions, and he also had the opportunity to go and work for this record label in Chicago called Black Swan. So tell us a bit about Black Swan, and then how he kind of went to Paramount after that.
Yeah. Um, so Williams, I don't think of him, at least in everything that I have read, um, interviews with, I mean, I think he only gave 5 recorded interviews that I could find, maybe 6. And he does not position himself as a racial pioneer or a civil rights activist or anything like that.
Mhm.
Um, but he does want the record to be set straight in terms of who did what.
Mhm.
Um, and he would have been aware that when he was recruited to be an officer in World War I, while he was at Brown, he would have been aware that the recruitment efforts to bring him to an Ivy League school, or to bring him into professional football,
Mhm.
um, or to work for an NAACP supported record label, um, and a black newspaper in Chicago. He knew that all of these things were part of a multi-front push
Mhm.
for racial progress in America.
Yeah.
And he jumped in fully, and wanted to succeed in those spaces. So he gets these offers to coach football. He probably has like 5 different offers at the end of college, at graduation. So this would be 1921, to go to these different places, in Alabama, Georgia, Texas, Illinois. And instead of becoming a football coach, he goes to Chicago because his family is there. And he's met this guy through his black fraternity, Alpha Phi Alpha, um, who had gone to Yale,
Mhm.
who the two of them had met at some party in college. And he said, Joe, this guy's name was Joe Bibb. He ran a newspaper called the Chicago Whip, and he also was one of the people who helped to run Black Swan Records. And he said, if you come to Chicago, I'll give you a job. And so Ink Williams sees that as a space where he can, um, I don't know, he's an ambitious person, and that
Mhm.
there's kind of this, it's a new field. The record industry is a new field,
Mhm.
new business model. Black newspaper is relatively new, at least the Chicago Whip, and so he kind of sees this as a place where he can make a name for himself.
Hmm.
And he takes a job as a collection agent for Black Swan in Chicago, and so he goes to all these record stores, and he's you know, they get the records, they sell them, he goes and picks up whatever they've made off of selling Black Swan
Hmm.
albums and records, sorry, singles. And he gets to know everybody. He
Yeah.
gets to know all of these musicians who would play sheet music out on the street. He gets to know um, kind of what's selling and what's not. Black Swan had this racial uplift agenda to it, where it wanted to not just be a successful kind of for us, by us black record label. Um, they had an agenda of getting black record buyers to aspire to a higher class of music.
Sure.
And so they had some blues records as of 1922,
Hmm.
um, but it
Hmm.
was a smaller part of their overall catalog. But what he sees is that this is the stuff that people actually like,
Right. Right.
and it's the stuff that he actually likes.
Hmm.
He also likes the kind of Paul Robeson light opera stuff too,
Hmm.
but he sees that it doesn't sell,
Right.
and so he kind of ingratiates himself within Black Swan Records, and he writes a little bit for the Chicago Whip, and he sees that the Chicago Whip, Joe Bibb, is embezzling money from Black Swan Records, and
Hmm.
it starts to go out of business. And they've gotten this. Uh, they have an agreement with Paramount Records, which was a white-owned and operated record label and record pressing plant in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Uh, they owed them a bunch of money,
Hmm.
and Williams goes and takes a train to Wisconsin, and he says, "Hey, seems like that Black Swan's going out of business.
Hmm.
Give me a job, and I'll make this race records business work for you." That's not a quote, but that's the gist.
Hmm.
And, you know, this is where, um, I mean, again, this is me trying to read backwards into history, but here you have a person who um, was part of a profoundly marginalized community at an Ivy League school, who would go and play in front of 40,000 people at the Yale Bowl, and people are literally chanting to kill him.
Hmm.
And he had guts,
Hmm. Yep.
right? And he had confidence, and he
Yeah.
had been through a lot
Yeah.
at that point, primarily through sports, but also a little bit through just social life at Brown, and being in the Army. And so for him to kind of walk into this boardroom in
Yes.
in a tiny town in Wisconsin where
Right.
everybody's white,
Hmm.
and just to say, "Hey, I'm your guy,"
Right.
takes guts, and
Right.
it worked.
And white enough that people noticed him walking down the street on
Hmm.
his way from the train station to,
Yeah,
to the office.
and
Yeah.
follow
Yeah.
him, right?
Yeah.
They follow him.
And so that's interesting because, when you read about um, the culture and the history of early, country blues music, what came to be country blues and Delta blues, so much of it is tied in to Paramount Records.
Hmm.
And so many of these, the legendary artists, Blind Lemon Jefferson, Blind Blake, um, recorded on Paramount. And you're like, Paramount it has no relation to the current Paramount uh, motion picture company.
Right, right.
It's like a furniture factory in Wisconsin.
Hmm.
And how was this connection made? And Mayo Williams is the answer to that. Um, and he's going on his own taste, but he says himself he's got no musical training, really no aptitude for it. But
Hmm.
there's a thing that he has, like a way that he has of deciding if someone's good, which is if it makes him tap his foot. And I think he was on one of the interviews, like he like does it, and he's like, if it does this, then I'm going to sign this artist, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And he was, I mean, he was somebody that admitted that he liked to dance, and
Hmm.
somebody who at least two different times at Brown was part of these uh, Brown University St. Patrick's Day minstrel shows, where he would do, like, I guess what we would call clogging or tap dancing
Hmm.
to blues music,
Right.
or something we would call blues or jazz.
Yeah.
Um, and so, it makes sense that, I don't know. I mean, it makes sense within the modern record industry where you have like if you were to create a caricature of a talent scout or something today, they'd be
Mhm.
like, well, can you dance to it?
Right.
Right.
Yeah,
And
exactly. Yeah.
I mean, that's how it worked for him.
That and his foot was pretty smart. It could tell what
Yes,
people would want to buy. Yeah.
for sure.
And so yeah, he worked with Jelly Roll Morton, with um Tom Dorsey, or yeah, and Tampa Red, and Blind Lemon Jefferson. People don't know about him these days, but he was colossal. He was huge.
Yeah.
Um and a lot of the stuff was it's when you listen to it now, because of the technology that they had, it's hard to hear, but once you can hear past um kind of the overlay,
Mhm.
when you hear Blind Lemon Jefferson play and sing, you really are it sounds like it's from another planet. And so much blues, if you're American, blues music, you know how it goes, you know what to expect. But there's so much unexpected in it, right?
Mhm.
He's just doing things because he was inventing it, right?
Yeah.
But he
Yeah.
was doing things that
Sure.
people haven't quite caught on to since.
Yeah. One of the things I loved in doing this work was learning more about the relationship between Leadbelly um, and Blind Lemon,
Hmm.
and thinking of them as essentially being bandmates. It wasn't a
Right.
band; they were a duo for
Hmm.
3 years, before either of them ever recorded. And
Hmm.
like, if you listen to Leadbelly, one thing for sure about him is that he holds a really steady rhythm on guitar.
Yeah.
It's inescapable. It's
Hmm.
he's like he's keeping the beat. And then if you
Hmm.
listen to Blind Lemon, I mean, he's famous for the tempo of his.
Kind of want yeah.
Yeah, he's a solo
Yeah.
artist, and
Hmm.
he'll be in the middle of a song, and he'll take this incredible guitar
Hmm.
solo that is kind of in its own time.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And so the idea that the two of them played together must have stretched both of them. It
Hmm.
must have taken that thing that Lemon does and put it in this solid time, and they
Hmm.
must have been awesome. I
Yeah.
mean, they must have
Yeah.
been anyhow. Um, yeah. So, um, yeah, I mean, all these people, I guess that you see him at a moment where these different genres, what we think of as genres or
Hmm.
styles or whatever, are just being born.
Yeah.
Like, and these are the people: Ma Rainey, you know, Leroy Carr. These are the people that are kind of either coming up with different variants on the blues, or they are the people who are most dynamically, synthesizing this
Hmm.
stuff.
Yeah.
And man, it's just incredible.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and there's the longevity of it. We kind of talked for a second me more than a second about the sports thing. To come back to that real quick, I know that Ink Williams at one point had sat down to write his own autobiography, and he
Mhm.
decided to ultimately write two of them. One was about sports, and one was about music. And neither of those seems to have survived,
Right.
if they ever actually got written. And
Mhm.
uh, I don't know. I mean, I asked myself that question while I was putting this together. But the thing is, I think that from a 21st century vantage point, we see those worlds as being more separate than they were.
Yeah.
And it misses the point that Ink Williams was a bit of a celebrity through sports that
Mhm.
people that he used to his benefit in
Yeah.
the music business. And
Yeah.
so it would be a mistake, I think, to try to approach it in a bifurcated way.
Mhm.
Um, uh, what's impressive, I mean, there have been plenty of athletes that have done that, I suppose, for a hot second. What's really impressive about
Yeah.
Williams is that his longevity, this like 25-year period of time where it seems like he survives all of these changing tastes and changes in technology and all end of generations,
Mhm.
where he continues to be the guy who's at the forefront of introducing the next wave,
Yeah.
whether it's boogie woogie piano, or
Mhm.
whether it's I don't know, this kind of early Chicago blues rockabilly
Mhm.
suites of Louis Jordan and Sister Rosetta Tharpe and the Harlem Hamfats and
Mhm.
all that stuff. I mean,
Right.
it's pretty amazing. And then he loses it, but
Right. And that's another thing you do a good job of illuminating is um that Louis people like Louis Jordan or the Harlem Hamfats were for the black record buying public, they were really bigger than someone like Robert Johnson, who I
yeah,
mean, look, Robert Johnson didn't even meet Mayo Williams, so like how important could he be right now? But there's through the British invasion guys,
mhm,
Robert Johnson has assumed this position for rock music fans and blues music fans today of like this guy was the pinnacle. He was the virtuoso
sure,
who really set the standard. And you write, Elijah Wald also wrote a whole book about
he
this.
did.
But Robert Johnson was an obscure guy. No one really listened to him that much when he was alive. And the people who were around then during his lifetime, they were more into people like a Louis Jordan, like Leroy Carr, and those sort of more polished, you might say, modern sounding musicians. So,
Well, I mean, Robert Johnson, and
mhm,
I mean, uh, Elijah Wald's book about Robert Johnson certainly has been influential
yeah,
here
yeah,
in terms of how I approach this story.
mhm,
And as a folklorist, I love that Robert Johnson, as somebody who is maybe more obscure, is expressive of
mhm,
a more regional style.
yeah, yeah,
Or it's a little bit more place based than,
mhm,
let's say, Leroy Carr,
yeah,
or but Robert Johnson was so influenced by people like Leroy Carr and all these
mhm,
other, and Scrapper Blackwell. I mean,
mhm,
where you don't have Sweet Home Chicago without Kokomo Blues,
right, right,
um, and I don't know. I mean, one of the temptations, again, like as a rock music person, that's the crucible that I grew up in. It's
mhm,
the music I play.
yep,
um I tried my best to resist the temptation of talking about Williams's artists and the repertoire that he essentially recorded, and
Mm.
how that forms a huge chunk of the music that the British invasion plays. I
Right.
mean, there's so many songs
Right.
that, the Beatles, Stones,
Mm.
Animals, Bob Dylan,
Mm.
whomever, they
Yeah.
all played stuff that Williams had recorded.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't know. I mean, you don't have American music as we know it without this guy.
Mm. Indeed. And for those who are watching and considering getting this book, are interested, there's you made a playlist on Spotify and Apple Music, which I think has the same title as the book,
Hmm.
Inc. The Indelible J, Mayo Williams. And you can, if you just want to hear some of the music this guy was involved in, it's a great playlist. And
Oh,
I had a lot of fun reading the book, with the playlist, like just able to like when I come up to something, I like, oh, I'll just check in on that, and I can listen to the song. It's was a very a really great kind of uh, interactive reading
sure.
experience to listen
Oh,
and
cool.
to read at the same time. And you know, to be reminded of so much of that this great early music that he was involved in, and on his weekends when he wasn't going around cracking heads and collecting money from people and writing questionable contracts, he went out and he played professional football in the NFL into
Hmm.
his 30s.
Right. Yeah, yeah, there are a couple of things I mean, I was so excited to find a picture, a team photo of him. This is he was on a team called the Hammond Pros, who
Yep.
were in the NFL, and eventually, I don't know, 1927, 28, the Hammond Pros are out of the NFL, but there's like a version of that version of them that keeps playing pro football, just in different leagues.
Mhm.
And I found a team photo of him with when he played with Jim Thorpe, on the same team, and I don't know, that was
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
and I don't know. There is a moment where, um, I think that Williams liked the flexibility of being on a bad team in the NFL. Enabled him to do his
Yeah.
record business thing,
Right.
and I think he liked the flexibility that the record industry brought in terms of his being able to be like, hey, I got to go scout some talent, so I might be out of town
Yeah.
a little bit when he'd actually be playing football.
Right.
Um, I a, a, moment in time that I found fascinating was, there's all this press about him being expected to play for the Rock Island Independents in Rock Island, Illinois, who were an early NFL team, and they were supposed to be playing against the Chicago Bears. And everybody's anticipating that he's going to sort of jump from Hammond to Rock Island and play at this in this game in December, and he was a no-show. And lining that up with the incredible work that scholars of blues history have done in terms of reconstructing the timeline of when different
Mhm.
sides were recorded. It's the weekend that Ma Rainey is in Chicago and
Mhm.
records for the first time, and
Yeah.
like it's 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 an identifiable moment where he says, my day job is more important than my love for football.
Yep.
you know,
Yep. Yeah.
and where would we be without Ma Rainey?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
it's amazing.
So Cliff, my free version of Zoom says I have less than 1 minute of recording time
All
left.
right.
So I'm going to say thank you very much for joining me for this experiment in talking to humans on my channel. And if you're interested, go and does not show up well in my bad light.